Hi all, welcome to Mac Truck Bookstop. Here I am on this beautiful February day. Well, beautiful for February in Wisconsin. And I have just finished reading A Tall History of Sugar by Curdella Forbes. This book is written by a Jamaican author, an author born in Jamaica, Curdella Forbes, and it is very hard to sum up, as most of these books are. Um, well, according to the back, the novel tells the story of Moshe Fisher, a man who was born without skin, so that no one's able to tell what race he belongs to, and Arienne Christie, his quixotic soulmate, who makes it her duty in life to protect Moshe from the social and emotional consequences of his strange appearance. Now, this is a description, I guess, of the very beginning of the book, because there is a lot more to their relationship than Arienne protecting Moshe. They have almost a symbiotic kind of relationship. Um, Moshe is very interesting, and the reason I actually ended up buying this book for Jamaica, what made me most interested in it is when I would go to the bookstore and look for these books, I flip through them and something catches my eye. Sometimes I'll even look as far as like 3/4 of the book, and that was the case for this one. And I saw a quote from the Metamorphosis by Kafka, and I had just read that, referring to Gregor Samsa waking up as an insect. And the idea of a man born without race, and then this Gregor Samsa connection to the Metamorphosis immediately grabbed my attention and made me think, oh, I really ought to read this. I think it'll be very interesting. So I went ahead and picked it up, and to start with, the description of Moshe is really interesting because it's like, in many ways, kind of like Gregor Samsa in the Metamorphosis. You never quite get a full description of what he's like, and it's always a little bit vague. Like, his hair in the front is one color, his hair in the back is another color. He's got two different colored eyes. His skin is so pale that you can see the veins coming out beneath. He bleeds and bruises so easily, like even just bumping against something. And it reminded me of Gregor Samsa as an insect as well, a little bit of that body horror. And I don't know if anyone else but me would describe the book this way, but there were certain parts of the book where I felt some intense body horror, like just how sensitive Moshe is described. And so I'm just talking about the physical sensations, not even about the stigmas he faces as being a pale man with an African man's face, as he's kind of described in Jamaica. So he's got apparently the facial features that they think of as African, but he's he looks like a white man. So they call him names and see him as different. But then also in one part of the book he goes abroad and they see him as they also recognize he's a little different, but they can't figure out quite what it is. Some think he's Eastern European. So the main theme of this book, obviously, or one of the major themes, is Moshe's confused identity, and I think a big part of the book is trying to represent Moshe as Jamaica itself in a character. Not just Moshe, but Moshe and Arienne, because their relationship is essentially symbiotic. Arienne, on the other hand, is a very dark-skinned Jamaican, She has, wild as it's described in the book, Medusa-like hair, and she's very tall, and um, she doesn't quite fit in either. Her father raises her, um, teaching her things that in the traditional society, when this book begins in the 50s, just before Jamaica's independence, um, women should not be taught. So martial arts, and um, he of course also teaches her to read, and she finds a lot of solace in books. And this is all this all forms her character, and her sort of protectiveness of Moshe as they become friends when they're both 6 years old, watching the chicken coop. They entertain themselves watching the chicken coop for some reason, and they become best friends at recess, and this friendship never lets go. It's just this, and at times it's described as a love relationship, and other times it's described as like a twin relationship. So it's very complicated, and I'm not going to tell you where it goes, but we follow them basically from babies to elders. Another thing about Moshe is that he's an orphan. So I guess I should have started by saying that, but after describing Moshe, you can imagine no one really knows what his origin is. There's some speculation that maybe he was a mix of an English school teacher and and someone of African background, and then so he's basically found. His name means Moses, and he's found in English, or our English, Moses. He's found in a basket by his mother Rachel, another biblical name, and his father Noah. So most of the names here are biblical. And Noah and Rachel raise him very, with all the love they can, even though their marriage is far from perfect. Noah's a very quiet man inside himself, and has a diabetic sore, which relates to the sugar mentioned in the title. And Rachel is a really fiery, somewhat violent, tempered woman, and they often clash, but they do raise Moshe with all the love and all the heart they can. Moshe goes out fishing with his father, and you get entrenched in sort of the culture of Jamaica in this book in a very lovely way. Like in some of the, I always go back to the mountains sing as that sort of entrenching you in that culture, and I'm sure now I can reference A Tall History of Sugar as another great example of that. And the story itself is very interesting. It's not told chronologically. It's a little bit it's jarring. Some of the time switches are very jarring, and there's even jarring is a great word for a lot of the things in this book. Another thing I can point out is when the narration switches from first person. Arienne is the narrator of this book, essentially, and you find that out pretty early on, or it's hinted at very early on, and you kind of figure it out. But then it switches where she'll talk about herself in third person. One last thing to mention about the book is that there's heavy use of the dialogue, the Jamaican patois, I think it is, basically the Jamaican English, that at times was very difficult for me to understand, especially in the beginning, and slowed me down a little bit in the beginning parts of the book. But as the book went on, I found I was able to start understanding more of it, because it is English. It's just another type of English, so you just kind of have to adjust your... it helps to read it out loud in the book, and then you get, oh, that's what they're saying. And it's very uncompromising in its use of Jamaican patois. Like, it's not watering it down so that you, as if you don't speak it, you kind of have to learn it as the book goes along, and that's fun. That's a fun thing to me, and it was enjoyable to learn and be able to feel like I was immersing myself and getting familiar with the way the people in the book spoke and the culture as the book went on. There's a lot of great integration of Jamaican folk tales in the book, and it's just a great. It was just so surprising to me what I got out of this book. I did not expect to be as immersed into it as I was, and of course I had a lot of preconceptions about what Jamaica was like, and this was very different, and very pleasing that it was different, and much more rich, much more complexity to Jamaica than I could have imagined. So with that, I'll end the non-spoiler section and say, if you'd like to read it without spoilers, I definitely recommend it. And now I'll talk a bit about some other things that, without worrying about spoiling the book. So, yeah, it was a really touching novel. It really got to me emotionally at the end in a way I wasn't expecting. And again, the ending was extremely jarring. I won't talk about that quite yet. The book got into some very extreme topics, especially regarding Moshe's, well, not extreme. It just got into some very sensitive topics, like regarding Moshe's sexuality, Arienne's sexuality, the two of them trying to work things out. And I thought that was just it really contributed to the whole feeling of just squeamishness, this body horror that I felt at certain parts of the novel, like this ultra sensitivity of Moshe. I think just kind of got to me in like a squeamish way, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it was something I hadn't experienced in any other book so far. And that's one of like the most how can I say, visceral memories that I'm going to take away from this book. Especially there's a scene where Alva, one of the best friends of Moshe, in kind of high school years, makes a sexual advance on him, and there's a scene where Moshe responds, and they have this encounter, and then afterwards Arienne feels betrayed, and that whole scene left me strangely squeamish and gave me pause. There's other ways this book moved me and I thought were really interesting, like Moshe, who eventually goes to England and has some kind of surreal experiences there in London. I love the part where he was talking about where there were all these places that he'd heard of in novels growing up, like Baker Street, and he knew all these places already because they'd grown up reading English literature. So he felt a little bit defrauded because London was nothing new in a strange way, and he's dealing with the people reacting to him, not really quite sure what to make of him, and he's caring for an elderly man as he starts to create art. And now Moshe's art becomes a very important part of this novel. Moshe actually becomes a renowned artist in Europe. And I was thinking at the time, perhaps this is representing how Moshe really is only able to thrive and become himself in Europe if he represents a part of Jamaica. It's very interesting that just as colonization in England took the sugar from Jamaica and thrived off of it, it is only in a colony in England that an outsider like Moshe can fully realize and spread his art and be appreciated. It was a really interesting dynamic, but at the same time you could almost look at that England is or Europe is kind of robbing Jamaica of it, but in the end Moshe goes back. He goes back, and his most famous work of art, or the one that propels his fame, is when he's in art school. He got to England as a stowaway, by the way, so it doesn't quite connect all the dots for you and you get the dots connected at strange times in the book. So it's kind of like in one moment he's in Jamaica in high school in his small village. That's in part two, which is districts and uh, villages or something like that, and then part three is the cities. So you're suddenly in London and you have no idea how he got there, but there's all these memories from Kingston that there's like flashbacks that lead you up to where he is now. And anyway, I was getting to why his art became important. So his art, um, his most famous piece to kickstart his art career was a nude of himself, a self-portrait nude, and that just to me is just an in-your-face kind of showing this is the sensitivity. This is Jamaica. You know, if this man represents a country with Arienne kind of as the voice in his head, because the two have like this somewhat uh, telekinetics the word? No. They have this connection, you know, where even across continents they feel that they can hear each other's thoughts and see through each other's eyes and things like that. It's kind of a strange connection that varies, that hovers between the surreal and the real. And so if this relationship represents Jamaica and this art exposes Jamaica, it's sort of this self-aware of like that's what this book is doing. It's exposing the raw, um, the skin that bleeds with the slightest touch, and the descriptions of the bleeding from the nose, the bleeding everywhere, you know, and bruising that Moshe experiences, and all of this I feel must be representative of the country, um, because that is a driving force behind what this book. It's just what I feel from the book, and I may or may not be right, but this is how I read it because it recalled to me how Ernesto Sabato in Sobre Héroes y Tumbas, an Argentine novel on heroes and tombs, used a character called Alejandra to represent Argentina, a person representing a country, and yeah, so Moshe does eventually go back, and the last thing I want to touch on is how the ending. I did not expect the ending. Moshe goes back to be with Arienne, and they get married, so it looks like it's going to be a happily ever after. But Arienne already has a kid with another man who she married kind of on a whim, and he essentially raped her, and now she has a kid, and now she's no longer married to him. And then Moshe marries her anyway, and there's forgiveness between the two. It looks like it's going to be all happily ever after. But then Arienne says, there is no happily ever after. That's not the way this is. There's a short dialogue on how they are soulmates, and or like some quotes about the soulmates from I can't remember who it was, the Greek philosopher or whatever, and Ariane quickly refutes this because yeah, there's just no. Sorry, I was distracted by some people walking over there. I'm in the middle of a public area, but Ariane refutes this and says, no, while she seems to believe in it, she has visions and dreams of like some strange cellular interactions, some biological surrealism. I'm not quite capturing all this, but I'm trying. But the point is, they go forward with this relationship that's less than perfect, and you see parts of it at the end, and then finally at the very end of the book, the most jarring thing, we actually see or view the world through Ariane's eyes in the throes of dementia, her child grown, and still struggling with this difficult and at times somewhat toxic relationship that she's had with Moshe, and still reaching for a conclusion. And finally, in the final moments of the book, while she's screaming at her daughter because of the dementia and not understanding, and in all of this, she finally comes to peace and sails away and dies. And it was an incredibly surprising and moving ending, especially being someone who a grandparent of mine had dementia at one point, and it was just such a it caught me by surprise is what I'm trying to say, and had a real emotional impact, that ending. Something similar to what I felt at the end of On the Beach, but instead of the whole world and all life being wiped out, just being in the mind of someone with dementia, and her recreating that in the final chapter, I thought was just, it was sad and genius. And Curdella Forbes in this book is really evil to her characters, and it's kind of like that. I've heard a quote before, like, to be an author, you kind of have to be a little bit sadistic to your characters, and I feel like Curdella Forbes in her novel here just really does not pull any punches, and the characters are battered as life would batter you, and there's nothing perfect about the way it ends, but it is beautiful, and there is moments of happiness, and it's not a book that I would call like depressing, but beyond all this, I think one of the most pivotal moments of the book, or one of the moments of the book that really sucked me in, is when Moshe is in England. Arienne's kind of viewing through his eyes. He's looking for his father. He can't find his father. Both of them have been told by one of the village elders back in Jamaica that, I'm going to run out of battery. Okay, so I guess it was just a little too cold for my battery, and I would just want to finish talking about the pivotal moment of the book that I wanted to talk about, which was Moshe had found out back in Jamaica that his mother was basically had abandoned him and then committed suicide, and so he decides to have sort of a mock funeral for her while he's in England. And this is inspired because he sees some Egyptian mummies at the British Cultural Museum, and it shocks him so much that he has nosebleeds, and he reacts quite violently to this, and it's never really, I guess, explained exactly why, but it's a pivotal moment because Arienne is seeing all this through his eyes, and he's coming to terms with the death of his mother in his own way, and he never achieves to find his father, and this is after this moment is when or around this time is when the comparisons to the Metamorphosis start. And actually there's one painting that Moshe never finishes that's called the Metamorphosis, and the more I thought about it, it was almost like it was Moshe working through the Metamorphosis in a way that Gregor Samsa never could. So that is the heroic act of the story, I believe, is Moshe creating his own destiny, and again, if he represents Jamaica, then there's some things to think about there. Again, not just him, but also Arienne, who in this moment is seeing this through his eyes. And so that is all I have to say about A Tall History of Sugar. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe if you aren't already. Appreciate any comments as always, and thanks again. See you next time.